Draft weekend, and specifically the first round of the NFL Draft, is one of the most exciting times in the NFL for both players and fans because of how optimistic the times are. This is the time of year where teams draft future stars, or unfortunately in some cases, future draft busts. Not everyone can be a star at the NFL level, and we find that out every single year. And in today's video, we're going to go back and discuss the long-term impact of both drafting the right and wrong quarterback. And in 2018, there were 5 quarterbacks selected in the first round, and of those 5, only 2 are on the teams that drafted them, those of course being Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. The other 3 were Baker Mayfield, Sam Darnold, and Josh Rosen, and we're not going to focus on Josh Rosen as much in today's video because after his tumultuous rookie year, the Cardinals already knew they messed up and fired their head coach and replaced Rosen and Steve Wilks, the head coach at the time, with Cliff Kingsbury and Kyler Murray. So while that was a miss of a pick, they already had the next plan in place. But for the others, both good and bad, there's been a lot of long-term impact since the 2018 NFL Draft, and with each situation, there's a considerable amount to dive into, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by talking about what the Buffalo Bills did right in terms of not only developing Josh Allen, but drafting the right quarterback. And as we know, drafting a quarterback in the first round in the NFL isn't something you're on the fence about as an organization. If you draft a quarterback in the first round, you are all in on this player, and you better do everything you can to help this player's growth and to ultimately help win games. Otherwise, you'll be out of a job pretty quickly. And when Josh was entering the NFL out of Wyoming, there was naturally going to be a big learning curve going from that level of play to being in the same division with the 6-time champion Patriots, or 5-time when Josh was drafted, and head coach Bill Belichick. And in 2018, Buffalo pretty much said, go out and make the mistakes and we'll learn from them together and we have your back, which I think was critical for Josh's development, by the way. And in Josh's rookie season, he threw just 10 touchdowns to 12 interceptions, completed just 52.8% of his passes, which is atrocious at the NFL level, and people were questioning if he could play and if he could hang around long term. They had no doubts of him from a running standpoint, but from a passing standpoint, things were very, very ugly at times. And to give you an idea of how much Josh has grown as a player in the past 5 years, in 2018, when targeting 10 through 19 yards from the line of scrimmage, he was 39 of 80 for the entire season, threw a singular touchdown and threw 4 interceptions. In 2022, he was 78 of 127, which was good for a 61% completion rate, and threw 16 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions. His passer rating nearly doubled in this area of the field as it went from 63.1 to 120, and the Bills have been a good team over the past few years, largely due to the development of Allen. But Josh hasn't been alone in this, and he did not become a top 5 quarterback overnight. The Bills have helped Allen out tremendously over the past few years in really every way possible. In 2018, Allen's top 3 receivers in terms of receiving yards were Zay Jones, Robert Foster, and Kelvin Benjamin, and with this supporting cast, not surprisingly, the Bills finished 30th in points per game that year as they averaged less than 17 per contest. The following offseason, they acquired John Brown, Cole Beasley, and selected tight end Dawson Knox in the draft, and Josh threw 20 touchdowns to 9 interceptions, and the team improved to 10-6 and finished 23rd in points per game. And in 2019, you started seeing the flashes we see every game now from Josh start to occur more often, and because of having a quarterback on a cheap rookie deal, the Bills could afford to acquire more talent and improve the roster because they didn't have to pay their quarterback yet. And in the 2020 offseason, they acquired receiver Stephon Diggs, and in 2020, Buffalo finished second in points per game and finished with a 13-3 record. Josh threw a career-high 37 touchdowns, and Stephon would go on to lead the league in receiving yards, and the Bills would put the league on notice. Unfortunately, they would go on to lose to Kansas City in the AFC Championship game, but the foundation for 2021 was there. And while all this was going on, the Jets were in a completely different state of their franchise, and a lot of it, though not all of it to be clear, because there were a lot more problems than just Sam Darnold. But the Jets would go on to finish 2020 with the second worst record in the league, as they would stumble to the line with a 2-14 record, and in a very Jets fashion, after starting their 0-13, won 2 games and drafted Zach Wilson from BYU instead of drafting Trevor Lawrence. And for the Jets part of today's video, I didn't want to focus on the Zach Wilson era, if you will, and wanted to focus more on the Darnold era and the lasting effects from those years. And for starters, the Jets, while they didn't completely hang Darnold out to dry in terms of getting him weapons, like we've seen with other quarterbacks over the past few years, it wasn't a great situation quarterbacks could come in and thrive. And during Darnold's rookie season, the top 3 players in receiving yards at the time were Robbie Anderson, Chris Herndon, and Quincy Enunwa. The NFL in 2018, even though it was only 5 years ago, was a lot different than it is now, and while I'm not saying these weapons were great by any means, because they weren't the worst in the NFL, and for reference, the Dolphins' top 3 receivers that year were Danny Amendola, Kenny Stills, and Kenyon Drake from a receiving yard standpoint, so you get where I'm coming from. And Darnold made the best out of what was a less than ideal situation, because Todd Bowles was on his way out as head coach, and GM Mike Maccagnan would stay through the 2019 draft, then was fired for the GM who is still there today in Joe Douglas. And with an improved roster along with what was a very easy schedule during the second half of the season, this is 2019 to be clear, the Jets finished 7-9 before Darnold's final season as a Jet, in which he would go on to have a 2-10 record as a starter and throw 9 touchdowns to just 11 interceptions. And the team's leading rusher was a 37-year-old Frank Gore in 2020, so I don't want this to come across as it solely being Sam Darnold's fault, but the point is, missing on the quarterback certainly didn't help the situation, and there was a gargantuan-sized mess to clean up. This team needed a new quarterback, it needed a new running back, and new receivers among many other positions. A good quarterback has to have help around him, like everyone does, but a good quarterback can act like a band-aid to a lot of problems on a bad offense. Obviously, they can't shield everything, and over the course of the season, the truth will come out, but the Jets entered the 2021 draft with the number 2 overall pick, while the Bills played in one of the greatest playoff games of all time, at the end of the 2021 season that is. The Bills and Jets went about their quarterbacks in entirely different ways, and you can certainly argue the Jets are still paying the price for missing on Darnold back in 2018. They traded next year's first-round pick, assuming he plays enough snaps of course, to try and fix their problem by trading for 39-year-old Aaron Rodgers. During the Darnold era, there was also this mindset or this belief that if worst came to worst, basically, hey, we drafted Sam 3rd overall, and when push comes to shove, Sam will save us. And Sam the Savior did not work out for a million different reasons. The pressure of playing not only in the NFL, but in New York of all places. He didn't have quick enough decision-making to play the quarterback position, at least not consistently, and he certainly did not have the help because this organization, well, really in every way, set him up to fail. Lamar Jackson was the final pick of the first round in 2018, and this pick was a little controversial at the time because of already having Super Bowl champion Joe Flacco on the roster, and because of how the offense would have to change with Lamar Jackson now on the roster. And the 2018 season didn't end pretty as the Ravens lost a home playoff game to the Chargers, in a game Lamar fumbled the ball 3 times and threw an interception. There were doubts heading into 2019, but Lamar erased all of them as he was on his way to an MVP season. Lamar went on to win his first playoff game in 2020, but missed each of the last 5 games in the 2021 and 2022 seasons. And during the Lamar Jackson era, there's been a lot of ups and downs, whether it was the playoff losses or the contract saga, but one thing is for sure, and other AFC teams would certainly agree with this, The Ravens are never out of it when Lamar Jackson is on the field, and of course the same can be said for Josh Allen too, but with Baltimore, that's arguably the biggest impact of having Lamar on their team, is they are always in games because he is dynamite with the football in his hands. The guys rally around him and his energy is infectious with both his teammates and the home crowd, and it's evident when he makes a big play. But having Lamar on the team isn't the easiest thing in the world because of his play style. And I mean that in a good way here, but because of how unique of a player he is, the offense is built around him. The Ravens run a significantly different offense than most of the other NFL teams, which in turn also makes them very, very difficult to game plan against. And how all of this comes full circle, and how having a healthy Lamar on their roster positively impacts them in the long run, is teams can't fully game plan against them because they don't have the speed and agility to match what Lamar can do. And throughout his career, there's been times where he makes guys look downright silly because they don't know what to do when he's within arm's reach. Unfortunately, the Ravens haven't been to the AFC Championship game, or further, during the Lamar Jackson era, but you would like to think at some point that will change. Their most recent playoff loss to Cincinnati was a very tough loss, which would be an understatement to all Ravens fans, and a game they believe they would have won had Lamar played. And when Lamar played against Cincinnati during Week 5 of the 2022 regular season, the Ravens beat them in a close game at M&T Bank Stadium. They've beat the other top teams of the AFC over the past few years, they've just had unfortunate things happen to them in the postseason. But having Lamar Jackson, a former MVP winning quarterback in the vaunted AFC, always gives them a chance to win, and in that conference, that's all you can ask for. The Browns are still feeling the long-term effects of drafting the wrong quarterback in 2018, and all you have to do is look at their draft situation. They don't have a first-round pick until 2025, and are hoping Deshaun Watson works out this year, because if he doesn't, well, they're essentially punting on 23 and 24. And had the Browns nailed this pick when they were on the clock at number 1 overall, I know this sounds cliche, but the same old Browns would be in conversations with the Chiefs and Bills and Bengals every single year. Their defense certainly needs help, but if they had a good quarterback behind their dominant offensive line, along with Nick Chubb, they would be a very scary team to face. And really the only time we've seen this in the past 5 years was during the back half of the 2020 regular season in a 10-game span where Baker Mayfield was largely a game manager and told, "Do not mess this up." And he didn't, as he threw just 2 interceptions in 10 games, and Cleveland finished the year on a 7-3 run, went into Pittsburgh in the wildcard round of the playoffs and won, then lost a very close game to the Patrick Mahomes-led Chiefs. That was the peak of Baker's time in Cleveland, and when they traded for Deshaun, they obviously showed everyone their hand at the table, which significantly diminished any trade value Baker had. And because the Browns haven't had a lot of team success over the past 5 years, there's a few great players on this roster that will end up being some of the most underrated players of this entire era, looking directly at you, Joel Bitonio and Wyatt Teller. Baker is now on the last legs of his NFL career with one last chance in Tampa, but when you break it down, the Browns are still looking for their quarterback and will not get a first-round pick back until 7 years after this draft took place, and that is a very, very big long-term impact of not selecting the right quarterback. Only about 26% of people watching are subscribed to the channel, so if you enjoyed, please like the video and subscribe. It only takes a second and makes a massive difference. Very exciting video Sunday, and until then, be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.